Good evening, everyone out there on the interwebs. My name is Jared, and this is my channel, Mazda B3K. Found that I was missing an intro for part 3 and the final part of the powertrain swap in the 2010 Ford Fusion, nicknamed Jadzia. So this is going to be that intro. Where we pick up is where we have finished swapping all parts on the block, and the new block is ready for reinstallation into the vehicle. Get everything connected, fire it off, make sure everything's good. Without further ado, let's watch and enjoy. Alright, so we made our adjustment, and what that gave us, you lose lifting capacity, but in exchange you gain height and you gain forward distance. We're still not quite as far forward as we want, but we know that when the crane arm starts to go down, it's going to move forward. And we may even have to actually back the crane up. But what we're doing right now is we are connecting the Fusion accessory leg, as I call it, that we're having to reuse. That the escape leg was not the same. It runs across the front. That's sensors for the transmission, the TCM, the transmission control module, which is the transmission computer. All the stuff required for the AC compressor and the alternator. And that's basically everything through there. It also contains the connections for some grounds and the battery and the main breakout here at the fuse box. And it even has some connections for the starter, I believe. So our general philosophy here is going to be keep everything out of the way. So we're using some bungee cords to get these heater core hoses out of the way and bring her down nice and slow. And as we need to connect things as we're coming down, we will. Bit by bit, step by step, very, very slowly until we get this thing seated where the mounts need to go, and then we'll just tighten everything up. And then we'll go below and we'll take care of the suspension stuff that needs to be connected. We've got 2 new CV axles to install, and then we got to straighten the wheels back out, put the brake calipers back on, and all that good stuff. So I'll bring you back when we get to our next moment here. Okay, so you can see we've got the engine most of the way back down, but we're still working on buttoning some things up. So we found there's a challenge with getting these cooler lines back on. The one near the front, not so bad. One in the back, we were having length issues, and what you have to do is actually rotate the tubing a bit because there is soft line kind of buried down at the bottom of the radiator. And once that happened, we were able to get it to line up correctly. Another thing to keep in mind, and this one bit us in the butt, is there is a nipple for the coolant overflow tank right here. You can see we snapped it. We have to find it and glue it back on because the way that this coolant system works, all parts are under pressure, so you can't just kind of be lazy about it. So we're going to find something for that. But otherwise, as you go down, just take it really slow. Stop every inch or two. Check every spot and make sure that you're not having clearance problems. If you do that and you go slow, you should be able to drop it down without too much issue. One thing we haven't done, I'm probably going to have to connect from the bottom, is the main AC line over here. We're not able to take the opportunity to install it from the top, and now the AC compressor is pretty far down, so we're going to have to sneak it in from the bottom. Forgot to mention that to get the swing room you'll need for a 26mm back here, you need to remove the battery tray support bracket, which is this guy here. It's a pair of 10mm bolts, not that hard to remove. Good morning, everyone. It is the next day. So the last thing I did yesterday is I did succeed in reconnecting the AC line to the compressor. There's a 10mm bolt. I know you can't see it. I basically had to do it blind. Let's see if I can get it a little better. There, at least you have an idea what it looks like. So it goes in at an angle. It is key because you got one big tube and one small tube. There's a 10mm bolt that runs through the middle. Right now I have it finger tight. I haven't done final tightening. I'm not sure how to get a tool down there. I'm still pondering that one. So I'm going to leave that be for now. And I'm going to switch my attention over here to the starter. So the orange lug you see there, that one is copper, and that's where the positive battery cable is going to go, which is here. The negative is going to go here. Screw that back on tight. And we have two positive cables. I have to remember how this went, because this would have to go on the end if it goes there, because it has this boot that covers everything. Could be that both go on there, because this positive runs straight off the fuse box, and then this positive is what ultimately runs back to the battery, because if you follow the cabling, it comes out here to the battery chunk. Anyway, I'm going to work on that. Here's our negative here, our ground. And we got to reroute these heater hoses so that they are aligned appropriately. And once we get all of that done, the next step will be the installation of the plenum, because it's kind of a pain to do starter stuff with the plenum installed. So the plenum will be the last thing we do over here. And then there's some odds and ends. There's a little bit of work that has to be done with the battery wiring. There's some odds and ends to handle over here with just routing. The AC lines need to be reconnected over here. Notice we still got them bagged to keep them clean. And once all that is done, that pretty much takes care of the top side, and then we're going to lift it in the air. The dog bone mount still needs to be rebuilt, and the CV axles still need to be installed on either side. And then you have to feed it through the knuckle and tighten up the axle nuts, and then we have to re-tighten the top of the knuckle to the upper control arm. And before we do that, we have to figure out how to set the preload, or how much compression the suspension tower needs to be under when you tighten that up, so that it's like when you're doing normal driving versus normally when you have a vehicle in the air and everything's fully extended. So we're going to take care of all that. The goal today is to at least be able to fire this thing up. I don't think it'll be ready to run yet, and the reason being is that right here, sorry about that, looking at this upside down. Okay, where's the trans line? Right there. All right. So the nipple that goes above that trans line, you see that hole? There's a plastic nipple that's supposed to be sticking out there, and I broke it. Or we broke it, somehow. Bumped it with the block, came off. So I've been looking at options on repairs, and it looks like either we're going to have to insert a little metal tube in there, and then use and epoxy it and use a clamp, or maybe we can insert a brass nipple in there, thread one in. But the problem with that is basically if I wanted to do any threading and tapping, I am 99% sure that the radiator would need to come out. Pretty darn sure. Because we have a transcooler line there. I just ran this AC line, so the AC line has a little bit of flexibility. We could take that in loose and flip that out of the way. But I'll have to get my tap and die kit and take a look. Because if I can swing the transcooler line out of the way, and I can swing this AC line out of the way, I may be able to do a tap and die job in situ, meaning not having to take the radiator out. But you got to have enough room to get a drill bit in before you insert your tap, is the problem. And the tap I might be able to get in, but I don't have an ultra compact drill. So I can tell you right now, my drill is not going to fit in this space. So anyway, I'm going to have to ponder that, but I'm going to go ahead and get started on the other stuff. Wanted to point out that as you're putting the positive leg back on the starter, on the copper lug there, if you look closely, let me zoom in here, this is keyed. It's only meant to go one way. See how the plastic's been carved and curved in? Well, there's a similar curve on the lug. So it wants to go like this, where you've got the tab, it's up on the plastic, and then this kind of is in line there. And I got it pretty close. It's good enough to work. What I had to do is take the positive leg and I had to shove it down underneath the starter, between the dipstick and the starter, and this big fat head here is still, it's going to put some pressure on the dipstick tube. I'm not sure this is how the factory routed it, but this is what I have come up with to get this to drop on correctly. So the next challenge for me is, I'm pretty certain, because of what a starter is and how much it pulls, this goes on the starter on another post. I'm not worried about that, but I gotta figure out where this goes. This is a small ground. I think it reaches down and it goes on one of these studs that holds the starter in place, because I remember one of them was a double nut. Just not sure if it'll reach, so let's find out. Alrighty, I think I got this figured out. Not 100%. Remember, backyard mechanic. So on this post here, we actually have the very small thin ground, and then it's going to be hard to show you because there's a lot of stuff in the way. Alright, there we go. The big negative I put there. I know that there was something there, and there was a double nut on one of these starter posts, so I ran it down there, tightened it down, because the way the cable, the harness was laying, that's what made sense to me. So I've got the starter out of the way. I'll probably move on to the battery tray or something else. Alright guys, if you waited way too long to take care of the AC like I did, this is what you're going to have to do. Because at this point we're sitting on engine mounts. Let's see if I can get some visibility here. Okay, let me back up. There we go. So I have a short 10 millimeter that's sitting on the bolt head, and then a short 1/4 extension that is a wobble, meaning the head will pivot a certain amount. And then of course I have my 1/4 ratchet behind it, and that gives you the clearance to actually tighten up this bolt without needing to disconnect anything. Now, this is only going to work as long as the radiator fans are out. Otherwise, you will not have room to do this. This is how you do it. Also, progress update on the broken nipple. We grabbed a, what was a 1/8?
Yeah, it's considered to be a 1/8 bar. Pipe thread and stuff does not equate to regular measurements. What we did, we actually picked a fitting that would fit the inside of our hose here. Our hose here.
Yep.
Focus.
There we go.
So we found a barb that would fit inside that, and then we did a little Googling and found out that an 11/32 drill bit makes the right size hole for us to be able to tap and thread this fitting. And for extra leak insurance, we mixed up some of the fast set JB Weld epoxy, and that's going to sit and cure for about 4 hours, and that shouldn't leak. If it does leak, we're going to replace the radiator, but I think we're okay.
But the reason why we went down this path is one was time. We were able to get what we need in our local town versus going to the nearest city to get a replacement radiator, and cost. This cost me about $30 in tools and parts, and a new radiator is over $220 if I want to get one that has a warranty. So we got those two done. Now that that's out of the way, progress should move a whole lot faster. Those were the two kind of sort of things that we were stuck on, and now they're out of the way, so we're going to keep on moving. Alright, a lot of progress has been made, so we went ahead, we got this reconnected. The washer reservoir tube goes this certain way. There's actually an alignment pin, make it line up like that. This is what lets you wrangle the smaller of the two AC lines, otherwise it kind of pops all over the place. We actually misplaced the nuts here, so we snagged some exhaust nuts from the old block. Turns out they fit fine. They're 13mm fine pitch. So we got all that in. And then coming over here, we've got still need to put in the EGR bolts and the new EGR gasket. We've got all the vacuum stuff connected back here. Be careful when you put the plenum on, you don't squish anything. So all the vacuum's connected. We have all the sensors plugged back in, throttle body, all that good stuff. Working on screwing the plenum in, get all that done. Get the EGR done. The battery tray still needs to go back in. The air box needs to go back in. Shroud needs to go back in, but it's coming together. Pretty soon we'll have her up in the air. We'll put the axles in, and that'll be that. Battery tray is back in. That's a pair of 10mm nuts in the back. It's a 10mm bolt in the front. Plastic case. Don't kill it when you torque it down. And make sure you remove your battery hold down, because you do need to drop the battery in. And if the hold down's there, well, it's not going to sit. Alright, next stop. Probably the shroud.
Disconnect upper radiator hose for shroud removal.
So we just got the shroud back in, and you can put it in without pulling the upper rad hose, but it makes life a lot easier if you do. And since at this point, if you've been following what we're doing, your radiator is still empty, let's go ahead and do it. This is the electrical. Make sure that you've got it behind the shroud. Don't let it get trapped in front between the shroud and the radiator. It's bad news bears. There's also a large, I'll show you this end of it, but there's a large electrical leg that runs all the way across. Same deal. Make sure that it comes up between the block and the shroud, and not the shroud and the radiator, because as soon as the fan kicks on, you're gonna have a bad day. So don't let that happen. As a reminder, the shroud / fan, it drops into that little bracket there. This clicks in, one on that side, one over here, and then there's little hooks that hook into the top of the radiator. And once you connect it back in, you're done. Put this hose back on, put the clamp back in place, and then we put in the air box and we put in the battery. And we'll do a smoke test, make sure the magic smoke doesn't get out, and then CV axles. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. So the goal is tonight is to get the CV axles reinstalled. I found some water in our transmission last night. Some strawberry milkshake came out when I opened up the drain plug. I suspect it's like the torque converter, it's condensation, so I'm also going to send a quart or two down the hatch and see if I can't work that little bit of water out, because a tiny bit of water will come out through the breather that's built into the transmission, but we don't want water in transmissions. From the research I've done, water in transmissions is a very bad thing, at least automatic transmissions. Anyway, driver CV axle, that's where we are. I used my puller, pop this apart. It's held in place with an 18mm nut. Use the puller, pop that loose. This is the top of the control arm where it meets the knuckle. If you remember, we have to get this knuckle way down and way out so that we can thread the CV through the middle, the fork there, and into that hole into the transmission. So before I go and jam stuff in there, I'm going to coat the end of the axle with some ATF. I'm going to coat that seal a bit with some ATF, clean up around it carefully, and then we'll get her in, see if we can't close this all up, and I'll repeat the process on the passenger side. And fingers crossed, since I've got all the right tools on hand, this shouldn't take too terribly long. Alrighty, I have taken my finger and I have wetted up the seal and everything behind it. So that's nice and lubed up. This is the end that goes into the transmission, and you know it is because it has this retaining C-clamp or C-ring, so you can kind of push it around. And I've lubed that up with some fluid, some ATF, Mercon LV. Now what we got to do is thread it through the middle of this, down the way, and push it in until this gold collar is firmly seated around that seal, because this gold collar is a dust cover. It is supposed to provide basic dust and water intrusion protection. It's not waterproof, but it'll help. You hit a splash or something, right? It'll help to keep this clean. So spline's all lubed up, and here we go. I'm going to try this one-handed. I may have to put the camera down, and yeah, that's probably going to happen. This is quite heavy. Yep. So I got it this far. I got to put it down. I don't have enough strength to do this one-handed. Be right back. Alright, I don't have it fully in, but I've got it most of the way in. And what I had to do to get it through here, this was really, really tight. I took some silicone spray and I sprayed down the boot to make it slippery. And I made sure that the clamp they used to hold the boot on the cup there, I made sure that the clamp bumps were facing up, where they were just going to air and not brushing against the sides of the bottom of the strut tower. I mean, it was that close. So anyway, now I'm going to wiggle it and jiggle it, and let me get under here so you can get a little bit better view. There. So as you can see, right now it is not fully engaged. So we need to wiggle and jiggle this thing until we can... What it's catching on is that C-clamp I pointed out earlier. So when you get to this point, wiggle it, jiggle it until you get past the C-clamp, and then it'll just pop in. And you'll be good to go. Anyway, I need 2 hands for this. I'll bring you back. Hey guys, that's what it's going to look like when it's fully seated. I grabbed the other end of the axle and just gave it a good solid push, and it got past the C-ring there. And now you see the gold cups firmly seated against the side of the transmission. There we go. Alright, I'm going to get to the other side, and now the focus is we got to get the other end of the axle into the knuckle without tearing the boot. Alright, so I'm just going to reassemble what we took apart. I used my floor jack and I lifted up the knuckle until I could start pushing this, having a brain fart here, this ball joint in. There you go, that's the word. And once I was able to push it in and get some thread through, put the nut on it and cranked on it pretty tight with this is an 18 millimeter. And I seem to remember we took that off. It's a 19 millimeters, so I will double check that. It's a little difficult to see, but this is the routing for the ABS speed sensor for the tone ring. I took the bracket off here for the caliper to make more room, put that back on. And then I'm about to put the brake caliper itself back on. That's a pair of, I think, 16 or 17 millimeter bolts. It bolts up to the knuckle. And after that, you have to get this end nut here, this axle nut, which is actually just a nut on the CV axle. It is torqued to 185 foot-pounds. So you need a beefy torque wrench to go after this one, which I do have. If you don't have one, you're going to need to shell out some coin to get one. Otherwise, and I do not condone this, I don't recommend it, but it is an option, just not a good option. You know, get a breaker bar with the appropriate sized nut. I think this is a 32 millimeter. And just crank on it with everything you got. But I really don't recommend that. Get the torque tool, go to your local auto parts store, borrow the torque tool. It's 185 foot-pounds. You almost never have to fool with this unless you're doing suspension work. Go borrow it, go find a buddy, give him a couple of beers to borrow it, whatever, and get this right. Because if it's over-torqued, you might snap things. If it's under-torqued, it could wiggle free at speed, and that would be really bad. Okay, and that's what we're going to look like. This actually has to be torqued in the air because otherwise you can accidentally damage the axle bearing, the wheel bearing. So I think the only way you'll be able to do that is if somebody's in the car and actually has their foot on the brake pedal. I can't think of another way to make enough resistance to hit 185 because, as you can see, everything here is put together correctly. And I can turn this with my hand. Now the car is in park, and you know there's no fluid in the transmission at the moment, so I dare not try to move the shifter right now. I can't finish out the transmission until I replace the radiator that we accidentally broke, because this is an automatic transmission and you have cooler lines that feed into the radiator. So, but we're going to leave it at that for now, and once everything else is wrapped up and we can safely start this thing up, use the brakes, we will finish out this torque before we do a test drive. Now, I'm not going to do video for the passenger side because it's identical to what I just did here on the driver's side. The only tiny difference is the CV axle is shaped a tiny bit different because it plugs into it has a female end. Yeah, see if I can find it. Yep, there it is. It plugs into essentially an extension drive shaft. So this here is the male end. It's got the nut on it. This is what goes into the wheel and the knuckle. And that's the ABS tone ring right there. I'm writing with my thumb. And then this side you'll see is female. It plugs into a extension shaft that runs across, comes out the side of the transmission and then runs over to the passenger side because the transmission sits on the driver's side. It's got to have an extension drive shaft to make it through. That is the only difference. You still have a cup that you want to flush up against, and other than that, everything I just did is, apologies for the light there, everything I just did is exactly the same. So I'm not going to film it, and I will catch you guys probably when I'm crawling around underneath the vehicle. I still have one mount to secure, exhaust needs to go in, and I need to set up my drain pan for that bit of transmission flush I'll be doing. Good afternoon, everyone. We're back. And last night I put a quart transmission fluid in here. Only a quart because system's still open. I don't want fluid peeing out cooler lines or anything like that. But now that I have the CV axles in, it'll actually sit here and not pee out of one of the seals. So what I'm trying to do is we want to see if this is going to come up pink. Pink is bad. We want ruby red. Let's see what we get. Oh yeah. I like it, don't you know? Alright, so that looks really good, but the story is more told here. Take a look at that. So as you can see, though the quart I put in looks really good, there is still some trace water contamination. But it's not nearly as bad as what I was worried about. I was expecting to have to go buy like multiple quarts. And these quarts are about $10 a pop. And if you're lucky, you can find a 5-quart jug for like $40 or so online. So anyway, looks like I have 1 or 2 more quarts to go through, but you see that this fluid is very red, not pink. which is excellent. Not much water contamination left in there. Anyway, this is the first thing on the list to do today, and the other things on the list are that guy, the dog bone, and this guy, the exhaust. And once those are done, that buttons up the underside except for the axle nuts, and I can actually I can put the tires back on, which is kind of exciting. So now I can let the car down, and the only thing left will be putting a radiator in. So yeah, we're getting there, guys. We are really, really close to having this powertrain swap done, and really it turned into multiple things. Powertrain swap, CV axle swap, radiator swap, battery tray swap, starter swap. Just fixing things as they came up, and I'm really excited to hear this run. It's probably not happening until probably Sunday. But I want everything ready, so all I got to do Sunday is put in a radiator and then fire it off and see what happens. Alrighty, guys. This is the dog bone mount. It is the third of the mounts that hold the powertrain in place. This one goes on the bottom of the transmission, and the other side's on the subframe. So the bolt feeds in from the passenger side. This is an aftermarket mount, so it's a little bit different in how it needs to go in. There's a giant spacer that the aftermarket company included. You got to feed the bolt through that. So you can see you've got a retaining nut at the end. Got to figure out the sizing. I'm going to crank this in tight. And then after that, we move on to the exhaust. I forgot to mention that it's going to be tight. If you're using a stock mount, it's going to be rubber bushing, and it'll be tight into the coupler it's going into on the transmission. And you may get a hammer and maybe a screwdriver to kind of move things around to get them lined up enough to feed the bolt. That's what I had to do. Okay. That turned out to be a 15 millimeter bolt. Moving on. Exhaust. So there are two connections here because this is a Y-pipe. I like this Y-pipe a whole lot more than the one on some other vehicles I've worked on. This side, let me zoom out. This side of the Y-pipe has studs, so pretty easy. This locking collar does slide back, and you have a little bit of squish at this flex pipe. So squeeze it back, get it between the studs, push the locking collar on the studs, and I've got the two nuts. I think they're 15 millimeters. Got those on. Then over here, we actually have some hardware. We have some bolts, which I have here. And we just thread those in and get her good and tight. So I'm going to do that, and then I guess next thing we'll do is drain the transmission again, see what that looks like. Something I noticed while I was down here is this torn boot. It's kind of frustrating because that's a brand new part. It probably only has about 1,000 miles on it. So, ladies and gentlemen, do not buy Mevotech. Their quality is not so great. So what I'm going to try to do is use this. Now, anyone who recognizes this is probably laughing their butts off. This is a liquid electrical tape. And you blob it on something, it dries, it makes a rubbery coating. It's supposed to kind of hang on there. I don't know, call it an electrician's flex seal. But I'm going to try this. See if I can't close up that boot while I'm down here. You put down a coat. You stir it a little bit first, put down a coat, wait 10 minutes, put down a coat, up to 4 coats. And we'll see what happens. Had to use this a day or two ago. We nicked some of the ECU wires, and I didn't want to leave them bare, so goobered this stuff on there, and it dried up. Looks pretty good. So we'll see what happens. And while I'm doing that, I'm also gonna pop this guy again, see what the fluid looks like in the transmission now that it's had a chance to ooze on down into the bottom where the drain is, hopefully capturing any water that was in there along the way. All right, so as you can see, this is 4 coats, and it actually did cover the hole. And I have no clue if it's going to hold after the first couple of flexes, or I have no idea. But for the moment, it is sealed so that the grease boot can, well, hold grease. So the camera would behave. That's better. I'll give you an update in the future, see what happens with this. But for now, it's getting late. It's cold. I'm done for the night. And I will see you guys probably when get the radiator in. All right, so we know we have the radiator full. Next step is we gotta get coolant into the block itself, and to do that, there is a bleeder right here. And as you can see, the bleeder is held in with red Loctite of all things. You almost think they don't want you to use it. So red Loctite gives up in the presence of heat. We have some heat. Don't try this at home, kiddies. All right.
Take the time to really look at your work area and make sure that you're not going to splash any flame onto any electrical or anything else that doesn't like flame
or heat.
Here we go.
That's it. Here we go. Perfect world, you'd hit this until the Loctite bubbles, but I don't know if we can keep heat on it that long. Alright.
I just saw a wisp of something.
Yep.
Alright.
Let's see what we get.
Fingers crossed. Please, 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 please work.
Yep. Are you on set to loose? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Heat.
Perfect.
Woo! Yeah, because we'd already galled this a little bit, and we were getting kind of worried. Red Loctite. It's amazing stuff, and remember, you need heat. See how much... Hang on, let me get this to focus. Oh, focus.
Focus.
Alright, I know that's going to be hot. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, see, they had that full of red thread locker. That would not have come out without heat. At this point, we're using some gravity to our advantage. This fill point in the overflow reservoir is the highest point in the cooling system, meaning it's actually taller than anything else. And what that means is we can pour in fluid there, and it's going to force fluid through the system and fill it up until it's full. Gravity is our friend in this case. So what we should see is when the block is full and the water pump is primed, we will see coolant trying to come out of this bleeder before we see it coming out of the main fill port. Science. And there you go. We have coolant coming out of the bleeder, which means that the block is full. Unless there are passages in the block that are higher than the bleeder, which possible, but I'm not 100%. Anyway, this system is pretty much primed and ready to go, so we could safely start it now at this point. But we still need to get AC lines and transcore lines reconnected and fill the transmission before we actually try to start the vehicle. Okay, we've got the shroud back in, and all I can say about that is it's the same deal as the radiator. You have to come in from the top, and you're going to have to wiggle around the actual little clips that go in that allow it to sit in the radiator right there. You're going to run into hard lines and all sorts of fun and fascinating things that are getting in your way, but you can get it back in without having to pull a radiator hose. The easy way out is you pull a radiator hose right here. Pull it all the way out. The problem is the radiator is going to pee a lot of fluid if you haven't already drained it. But pull that out and it'll slide right in. Otherwise you have to do it in hard mode, which is what we did. And we got it, but it was not fun. Alright, so we're doing a sanity check. We've got all of our stuff clamped back in. Got the accessories plugged back in, like these, the fluid neck, and we've got the AC line routed, and got this line routed. And my brother here is working on making sure that we don't have any wires that are going to wind up touching this front exhaust manifold. Because a lot of stuff, unless it's set up for heat resistance, it doesn't do well next to a manifold. So we're going to button things up, and then we're going to move on to the transmission. I need to drain that last quart of flushing transmission fluid, and then we're going to do the actual fill. And at that point, finally, we'll be ready to try to start this thing. Alright, I finished draining out that last flush quart of Mercon LV. It looks really good, so we're going to proceed with the fill. The plan right now is to put 5-6 quarts in, and then probably just bump the starter enough to get the pump to engage so the torque converter fills with fluid, and then we'll top it off again, and then we'll actually try a start. At this point, everything's there. We have oil, we have coolant, and now we're adding fluid. Okay, we've got it filled, and we're actually going to try a start. I'm going to hand the camera off to my brother so he can kind of do an exhaust cam. We're expecting, in case I didn't mention it, this block that we put in, it's good, but it was in a rollover. So we know that oil got past the rings, and we expect this to smoke a little bit when we fire it off. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to let him have the phone as an exhaust cam, and I will attempt a start. See what we get.
Okay, folks, I'm about to kick off.
Nothing crazy. Here we go.
All right.
Starter. The brakes on, which should be. One thing I'm noticing is it's sticking in the run position.
The key is?
Yeah. It's not bouncing back when I let go.
We haven't touched any of that.
No, we haven't. I don't know if this is like computer or what. You know what I didn't think about? Fuel system's lost prime.
Oh!
It may be battery.
It sounds like it's trying to start.
Yeah, I hear it hitting. Okay, whoa, right. So, what we found out after doing a quick investigation, this is one of the plugs. Remember, this vehicle was in a rollover?
The engine that it came out.
Yeah, the engine, thank you. The engine that it came from, this 2011 Escape, was in a rollover. That's why I wound up getting it. You'll see this plug is fouled with oil. And also the electrode is fairly worn, and it's worn unevenly. So we made the decision to go ahead and put new plugs in it. We could have swapped in the ones from the old block, but I wanted to go ahead and just put in new ones since we've got so much new shiny going on here. Anyway, when we were cranking it, it was firing on some cylinders, but not all, so we suspect... Ooh, that one's nasty.
Yeah, come get a close-up on this one in the sun.
Yeah, this one's pretty fouled.
Look at that gap.
Hang on. Having focusing issues. Yeah, that electrode's really worn. So between the electrode being worn and them being oil fouled, we're suspecting that's why we couldn't fire off. So we're going to switch all 6, and what that means also is, unfortunately, the plenum has to come out, which is a pain in the ass, but yeah, we'll get to it.
Here we are. This says Germany, not Japan.
Yeah, give you a counterpoint. On the right is our brand new Bosch double iridium plug that we're going to put in, and on the left is the old one. You see the electrode has suffered heavy wear in addition to the oil fouling. So.
I also suspect that these OEM plugs are inferior to the iridiums that we purchased. Typically modern engines, you'll see their plugs have this tiny 0.4 millimeter tip on them. That allows them to fire at higher voltages and reduces electrode wear, because the sparks actually jump off from the edges of the electrode. That's the science behind spark plugs, and what happens and why they do what they do is quite interesting. Hopefully, first start when you're ready.
All right, here we go. We're in park. Get me. That sounds about the same.
Okay. White smoke. More white smoke. You put oil in it, right?
What's that?
It's got oil in it, right?
Yeah, it's got 5 quarts in it.
Okay. Fire it again.
That's it. It ran.
And there she is. A little bit of valve train noise, but it calms down. Oil's got to get everywhere it's supposed to be. See, it's not knocking anymore. So, we determined that the reason we could not start this thing is that not only were the spark plugs fouled with oil, the injectors were also fouled with oil. Once we had this epitome, we went, oh, it makes sense now. You're going to see some smoke start creeping out once the manifold gets a little bit more warm. We got PV blaster, oil, you know, your general shop stuff. But she's running. Come listen.
Good morning, everyone. We're back. So you can see we are almost ready for the test drive. I've got the wheels back on. I've got the hood back on. I took care of some skinned wiring at the fan controller for the shroud. Topped off the coolant levels since we changed out the thermostat yesterday. We're ready. I checked the oil. Oil looks great. I think we're actually a little bit over full on transmission fluid, but I need to get it up to temp and run it through the gears to make sure everything slurps up the fluid it needs before I make that determination. At this point, though, we are ready to go, so I'm going to close her up, and we're going to fire it up, and we're going to drive. Alright, so we are started. Engine sounds great, and I'm ready to start our test drive. I was looking for a trans temp on my live data and I don't see it. So I guess we're just going to look at ECT, which is the engine temp, and we'll go from there. So have to watch out for this door here. Alright, we should move. Yeah, a little pop there because of the parking brake, because it sat engaged for 3 weeks. It's taken that long to get this done. She's moving under her own power. Brand new transmission. Brand new engine. This is outstanding. Alright, so I'm going to do a bit of driving. I'm not going to record it all because I don't have a plate on this. I can't take it out onto proper roads. I have to kind of hang out on dirt roads. So it's going to be a minute. I'll bring you back. Alright, so I just finished up the test drive. It shifted great. Everything felt great. Engine stayed within temp. So now that the transmission's nice and hot, we're going to check the fluid. Now, 2010s, they still had a dipstick. And when we take a look at it, if I can get this to focus, it shows that we're a little bit over full. And that's okay. So you see we got an add mark, and then anything in the hash, that is supposed to be good. Sorry about that. It is not happy because it's bouncing around. But you can see we're a little bit over full. That's fine. So, I declare this powertrain swap complete. The transmission is functioning correctly, best that I can tell. I can't take it to highway speeds until I plate it. The engine's running great. I'm still occasionally getting some random codes, but I think that is because the fuel injectors are still kind of cleaning themselves out, and really it just needs to be ran. It needs to be ran. Engines need to be ran. That's how they function their best. They're not happy when they sit for a long time. So once I get it plated and insured, I'll give it the good old Italian tune-up. And I expect that'll finish out some stuff. Alright, that is going to do it for the powertrain swap, part 3, for the 2010 Ford Fusion that I have. Please leave comments if you learned something, or if there's something you want to nitpick with me on. Please like, share, and subscribe. That helps grow the channel, lets me bring more content. And until next time, later.